The night air of Kalora City was cold, filled with the hum of alien lights and the distant echo of hover cars. Between the tall glass towers and glowing signs walked a tired man, holding a sleeping baby in his arms. His name was Elias Ward, a human single dad from a forgotten mining colony. His clothes were torn, his boots were cracked, and in his pocket was one single coin, the last thing standing between him and hopelessness. His daughter, Mara, whimpered softly. She needed new diapers. Elias smiled weakly and whispered, "Almost there, little one. Just a few more steps." He entered a bright alien store that sold everything from food to baby supplies. The air smelled of metal and perfume, and every alien eye turned toward him, a dirty human among shining creatures of wealth. The alien clerk behind the counter looked up with bored, glassy eyes. "What do you want, human?" he said in a sharp voice. Elias placed the small pack of baby diapers on the counter. "How much?" The clerk laughed. "For that? 20 creds." Elias opened his hand and revealed the small silver coin. This is all I have." The laughter around him grew. A few alien shoppers pointed at him, whispering words he couldn't understand but knew were cruel. Elias felt his face burn with shame. He gently rocked his baby, who began to cry again. "Please," he said quietly. "She needs them." The clerk sneered. "Then maybe humans shouldn't have babies they can't afford." Elias picked up the coin and turned away. His legs were shaking, his eyes stung, but he didn't cry. He couldn't, not in front of them. He started walking toward the door, whispering to Mara, "It's okay, baby. Daddy will find a way." Then a voice spoke behind him, calm, soft, yet powerful enough to silence the room. "Wait." Every alien froze. The clerk straightened immediately, his scales flickering pale blue in fear. The shoppers stepped aside as a group of royal guards entered the store, their armor shining like molten gold. Between them walked a tall figure in a flowing silver gown, her skin radiant like moonlight. Empress Alara of Kalora, ruler of 5-star systems, billionaire of the galactic markets. Elias stopped, confused. He had seen her face only once, on a holographic coin. Now she stood a few steps away, her golden eyes fixed on the crying baby. "What is his name?" she asked softly. The clerk stuttered. "He is just a human, your radiance." I did not ask you," she interrupted. Her eyes did not leave Elias. Elias swallowed hard. "Elias Ward, ma'am." "My daughter." Mara, the Empress, moved closer. Every step echoed in the quiet store. She looked at the small coin in his hand, then at the sleeping child. "Is that truly all you have left?" "Yes," Elias said. "But it's enough." The Empress tilted her head slightly, curious. "Enough for what?" "To keep trying," he answered. His voice was calm, but his hands trembled. For a moment, the Empress said nothing. Then she turned to the clerk and said, "Give him what he came for." The clerk hesitated. "Your Radiance, I said give him everything he needs," she said, her tone sharp as lightning. The guards moved instantly. Within seconds, the shelves near Elias were filled with supplies. Diapers, food, blankets, even medicine. The clerk wrapped them in golden bags, trembling the whole time. Elias stepped back, shocked. "I can't accept this." "Please, Your Majesty, I don't want charity." The Empress looked at him again. "This is not charity. It's respect." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You spent your last coin for your child. In a galaxy full of greed, you still chose love. That is worth more than all my wealth." Her words hung in the air like a song no one dared interrupt. The crowd watched silently, unsure if they were witnessing kindness or legend. Elias looked down at Mara, then back at the Empress. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking slightly. The Empress smiled faintly. "One day, human, you will repay me. Not with money, but with something far greater." Elias didn't understand what she meant. He only nodded and held his baby close. As he stepped out of the glowing store, snow began to fall, tiny white flakes against the alien night. Behind him, the Empress watched through the glass doors, a thoughtful look in her golden eyes. For her, it had been a simple act of mercy. For him, it was the start of something that would change both their worlds forever. The next morning, the twin suns of Kalora rose over the shining city, spreading light across the crystal towers. The people of the market were still talking about what had happened the night before, how the alien Empress herself had spoken to a poor human and paid for his child's needs. It had never happened before in the history of the Empire. Some said it was mercy, Others whispered it was weakness. Inside her silver palace that floated above the clouds, Empress Elara sat in silence by her tall window. The galaxy stretched endlessly before her, but her thoughts were still with that man, the human father with kind eyes and worn hands. She had met thousands of leaders, warriors, and kings, but none of them had spoken with the quiet strength Elias did. Her advisor, Lord Cain, entered the chamber and bowed deeply. "Your Radiance, shall we prepare the council meeting?" She did not turn around. "Cancel it." Cain looked startled. "Cancel?" "But the trade lords are waiting." "I said cancel." Her voice was calm but final. She was thinking of something else. "Instead, find that human." "The one from the market?" Cain hesitated. "The human? Forgive me, my Empress, but he is insignificant." Elara's golden eyes turned toward him. "So was I once before someone believed I was worth saving." Cain lowered his head. "As you wish." Down below, Elias walked through the lower district with Mara in his arms. The pack of supplies he carried felt heavy, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. For the first time, someone had looked at him, not as a beggar or burden, but as a father. He found an old maintenance cabin near the spaceport where he used to work before the factory shut down. It wasn't much, but it had a bed and running water. He cleaned it the best he could and wrapped Mara in soft alien blankets the Empress had given him. "See, baby?" he whispered with a smile. "We're going to be okay." He didn't know that, high above in the palace, the Empress was watching him through her observatory's projection crystal. She watched him clean the room, cook a small meal, and rock his child to sleep. There was no anger in his movements, no bitterness in his heart. Only patience. Only love. Elara turned to her maid. "Is this how humans live?" The maid nodded slowly. "Most of them, Your Radiance. They survive through struggle." The Empress whispered to herself. "They survive with so little, and yet they shine brighter than the stars." Later that day, a small envoy arrived at Elias's cabin. 2 guards in white armor and a tall alien woman wearing the royal crest stood outside his door. "Elias Ward?" she asked. He froze, thinking he was in trouble. "Yes, is something wrong?" "You are summoned to the Kaloran Palace by order of Her Radiance Empress Elara." His heart nearly stopped. "The palace?" "Yes, immediately." He looked down at Mara, then back at the guards. "Can I bring my daughter?" The guard smiled faintly. Her Radiance insisted. The palace was like something out of a dream. Walls made of glowing crystal, fountains that floated in midair, and corridors filled with music that seemed alive. Elias walked carefully, afraid to touch anything. The guards guided him into a massive hall where the Empress sat upon a throne of silver light. When she saw him, she smiled gently. "You came. I didn't have much choice," he said quietly. Her laughter was soft. "No, I suppose not." She stood and walked down the steps. "You impressed me, Elias Ward. Not because you are human, but because you are a father who did not give up." He didn't know how to answer. "I just did what anyone would do." "Not everyone," she said. "Most would have cursed fate. You endured." She gestured to a table set with food, strange alien fruits and glowing drinks. "Sit, eat, both of you." Elias hesitated, then nodded. As he sat, he noticed the Empress's eyes watching every movement. The way he fed Mara first, the way he smiled when she giggled. After a while, she asked softly, "Elias, why didn't you accept more help yesterday? You could have asked for gold or shelter." He shook his head. "Because I didn't want pity. I just needed a chance to stand again on my own." The Empress leaned back, her expression unreadable. "You are either the bravest man I've met, or the most stubborn. Maybe both," he said, smiling faintly. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then the Empress said something that startled everyone present. "Elias Ward, I want you to work here. In the palace. You will be my engineer and caretaker of the lower halls. You will have pay, food, and safety for your child." Elias blinked in disbelief. "Me work here?" "You said you didn't want charity," she replied. "So this is not charity. It's an opportunity." He hesitated, then bowed his head. "Thank you, Your Radiance," the Empress smiled softly. "No, Elias, thank you. You've reminded me that even in all this luxury, I have forgotten what real strength looks like." That night, as Elias carried Mara through the glowing corridors toward their new quarters, the Empress stood by her window again. Outside, the twin moons rose side by side, one gold, one silver. For the first time in years, she felt something strange in her chest. It wasn't duty or pride. It was warmth. The Empress of 5 worlds had seen countless treasures in her life, but now she realized the most valuable thing she had ever found was a human father with one last coin and an endless heart. Days passed inside the shining walls of the Kaloran palace, and each day felt like a dream Elias feared he might wake from. The marble corridors stretched for miles, glowing softly beneath his feet. Strange alien servants floated quietly through the air, tending to crystal plants and shimmering lights that changed color with the hour. Elias worked hard, repairing damaged panels, cleaning old vents, and fixing mechanical faults the royal staff had ignored for years. He never complained. He never rested until the job was done. Every evening he carried Mara to the balcony overlooking the glowing city below. The stars above Kalora looked different from Earth, but somehow gentler. What he didn't know was that the alien Empress, Elara, often watched him from the high tower's mirror chamber. She could see his every action through her floating orbs, how carefully he fixed even the smallest things, how softly he held his daughter, how he smiled even when exhausted. Elara had ruled for 40 cycles, commanded armies and signed peace across worlds. Yet watching this tired human work with quiet dignity stirred something in her she couldn't name. That morning, she summoned her council. "My Empress," Lord Kane said carefully. "The human continues to dwell in the lower halls. Do you wish him removed?" Elara's golden eyes flickered toward him. "Removed? No, I wish him elevated," Kane frowned. "Elevated, Your Radiance? He is a worker. He is a man who earns what he has," she replied. "Perhaps that is rarer than royal blood." Later that evening, Elias was repairing a heating unit in one of the nursery chambers when a messenger approached. A small blue alien bowed low and said, "Elias Ward, Her Radiance invites you to dine in her private hall tonight." Elias looked stunned. "Me? Dine? With the Empress?" "Yes, and your daughter as well." He didn't know what to say. He wore no fine clothes, only his cleaned work uniform. But he couldn't refuse. He washed as best he could, wrapped Mara in a soft white blanket, and followed the guards up the endless staircase that led to the Star Hall, the private dining chamber of the Empress herself. When the massive doors opened, Elias stepped into a room filled with light and sound. The walls sparkled like frozen fire, and the ceiling showed the moving stars of the galaxy above. A long crystal table stretched forward, filled with food from 100 worlds, glowing fruits, silver bread, and dishes that hummed faintly with energy. At the far end sat the Empress, dressed not in her usual royal armor but in a flowing gown of deep blue. Her crown was gone. She looked almost human in that moment, and softer, curious, and strangely warm. "Come," she said, gesturing. "Sit," Elias hesitated. "Your Radiance, She smiled. "Tonight I am not Empress, just Elara, and you are not a servant. You are my guest." He sat slowly, holding Mara close as she reached for a glowing fruit on the table. Elara chuckled softly. "She is curious. Like her father." Elias blushed slightly. "She's all I have left." Elara's eyes softened. "All the wealth in the stars, and yet I envy that." They spoke for a long time, about Earth, about his work, about the small dreams humans still held despite everything. Elara listened like she had never listened before. When he spoke about his late wife, there was silence in the hall. Even the air felt still. "She was strong," Elias said quietly. "She used to say, 'The stars don't shine for those who wait. They shine for those who walk through the dark anyway.'" The Empress nodded slowly. "Your wife was wise, perhaps wiser than most kings I've met." As the night deepened, Elara ordered a servant to bring a small box. She opened it in front of Elias. Inside was a tiny crystal token glowing softly. "This," she said, "is a royal sigil. It will grant you safe passage through the Empire. No one will harm you or your daughter while you carry it." Elias looked at the crystal and then at her. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," Elara said gently. "You remind me what power is meant for and to protect, not to control." But as they spoke, unseen eyes watched from the shadows. Lord Kane stood behind a column, his expression dark. To him this was more than kindness when it was danger. The court had already begun to whisper. The nobles feared the Empress was losing her royal focus, clouded by sympathy for a human. To them, Elias was a symbol of weakness, something unworthy of her attention. Kane clenched his jaw and whispered, "If he stays, he will ruin everything." When Elias finally left the hall, the Empress stood by the balcony watching him go. The stars reflected in her eyes like liquid gold. She didn't know why she had invited him. Maybe curiosity, maybe something deeper, something dangerous. All she knew was that the sound of his daughter's laughter echoing through her palace made the great halls feel a little less empty. And as the doors closed, far below in the city, new rumors began to spread. The Empress dines with a human. Some laughed. Some whispered. But one thing was certain. The story of Elias Ward was no longer just about survival. It was becoming legend. The palace was never truly silent, but that night it felt like the stars themselves were holding their breath. Empress Elara stood alone in the observatory, the galaxy swirling above her like a living painting. Yet her mind was far from the stars. It was with the human father who had changed something inside her without even trying. For the first time in years, she could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Elias Ward, standing in the market holding his baby with trembling arms, refusing to beg. His pride, his quiet strength, his unbroken love, it all haunted her. Finally, she called her handmaiden. "Show me his file," she said. Moments later, a holographic projection floated before her. It showed a simple record. Human male, widowed, former mechanic, origin colony 42. Mining district collapse survivor. Elara's golden eyes darkened. She whispered, "Collapse?" Meanwhile, in the lower quarters of the palace, Elias was awake too. The small room he had been given was warm and clean, but his mind was heavy. Mara slept beside him, breathing softly. He looked at her and smiled, though his eyes were wet. He whispered, "Your mother would have loved this place. She always wanted to see the stars." He didn't notice the soft hum in the air, a golden orb floating quietly near the window. It was one of Elara's watchers recording his every movement. From her observatory, the Empress watched him kneel by the bed and pull something from his pocket, an old piece of cloth torn and burned. He held it gently, whispering, "I'm sorry, Lyra." "I'm still trying." Elara turned to her handmaiden. "Who is Lyra?" "His wife, your radiance," the maid replied. "She died when their mining colony was destroyed. The explosion was caused by an Imperial drilling accident. One of ours." The Empress froze. A long silence filled the room. Then she spoke softly, her voice breaking for the first time in years. "One of ours." Unable to bear it, Elara left her chambers and walked down through the palace. No guards, no crown. Only her silver robe and the quiet pain of guilt. She followed the map to the lower quarters and stopped outside Elias's room. The door slid open with a soft chime. Elias looked up, startled. "Your radiance!" He tried to stand, but she raised a hand. "Please," she said quietly. "Sit." The Empress stepped inside, her golden eyes scanning the small room, the baby's cradle, the repaired light fixture, the small drawing of a woman taped to the wall. Everything was humble, everything human. "I didn't mean to disturb you," Elias said. "Is something wrong?" Elara hesitated. "No, I wanted to see where you live." He nodded slowly. "It's not much, but it's home." She walked closer to the cradle and smiled faintly. "Your daughter sleeps peacefully. You're a good father." Elias chuckled softly. "I just try not to fail her." Elara looked down at the drawing. "Is this your wife?" He nodded. Her name was Lyra. She was a mechanic like me. We worked in the mines back on Colony 42. She saved 20 people when the tunnels collapsed. The Empress's throat tightened. "She sounds brave." "She was," he said quietly. "But the explosion wasn't her fault. The company ignored safety warnings. The whole mine went up. She didn't make it out." Elara lowered her gaze, guilt burning through her. She whispered, "That company was under the Kelleran crown." Elias looked at her carefully. "You don't need to apologize, Your Radiance. The past can't be fixed, but it can be honored," she said, almost to herself. There was silence between them, the kind that carried more truth than words. The Empress walked slowly around the room, her hand brushing over the repaired furniture. "You fixed all of this?" "Yes, I used leftover parts from the maintenance units," he replied. "Humans build things even when everything's broken. Maybe it's how we survive." Elara turned toward him. "And yet you never asked for more." "I have enough," Elias said, smiling faintly. As long as Mara is safe, that's everything. The Empress looked at him for a long time. In that moment, she saw not a poor worker, not a human outsider, but a man who had lost everything and still found reasons to be kind. She whispered, "You humble me, Elias Ward." He looked confused. "Me how?" "You have nothing," she said softly, "and yet you live with more grace than those who own planets." When she finally left his room, dawn was rising over Solora. The golden light spilled across the marble floors as she returned to her chambers. Her advisor, Lord Kane, was waiting, concerned. "Your Radiance, where have you been?" Alara looked out the window and said quietly, "Among the only truth I've seen in years." Kane frowned. "The human?" "Yes," she said. "He carries a pain greater than most kings, and yet he bows to none of it." Kane's eyes narrowed. "Forgive me, my Empress, but such attachments can make rulers weak." Alara turned to him, her eyes glowing like fire. "No, Kane, it makes them strong." As the twin suns rose higher, Elias awoke again to find a small package outside his door. Inside it was a necklace, simple, silver, and engraved with alien symbols that read, "For the one who walks through the dark anyway." He smiled softly, his heart full. He didn't know the Empress had spent the entire night awake, whispering one silent promise to herself, "I will not let another human suffer for our mistakes." The next morning began with music and sunlight pouring through the high windows of the Caloran palace. Elias woke to the sound of Mara laughing. The tiny room that had once felt cold was now warm and filled with light. She was holding the shiny necklace he had found at the door, the one engraved with words he couldn't read but somehow understood. Hope. He smiled, whispering, "You like it, huh?" Pretty thing. What Elias didn't know was that the gift had come from Empress Alara herself. She had watched him carry grief with dignity and wanted quietly to return a small piece of comfort, but she also knew this simple gesture would soon cause storms she could not stop. At the morning council, the great chamber buzzed with low voices. Dozens of alien nobles in jeweled armor whispered to one another, their eyes full of suspicion and mockery. "The Empress spends her nights with humans now," one hissed. "They say she gave him gift," another sneered. "Next she will crown him Prince of the Gutters," said a third. Lord Kane stepped forward, his tone respectful but sharp. "Your Radiance, the Council grows concerned. The Empire watches. Your kindness to the human is being misunderstood." Alara sat straight, her golden eyes calm but burning deep inside. "Misunderstood, Kane? Or simply unappreciated?" Kane bowed slightly. "Empires do not run on charity, Your Radiance. The people believe you favor this man, that you have forgotten the line between ruler and beggar." The room filled with murmurs. Alara rose from her throne slowly, her silver robes catching the light. "If they believe compassion weakens the crown," she said softly, "then they have forgotten why we wear crowns at all." Still, she knew Kane was right about one thing. The whispers were spreading faster than she could silence them. Later that day, Elias was called to the Grand Hall. He walked nervously between tall guards, carrying Mara in his arms. When he entered, hundreds of nobles stood on both sides, their faces full of cold smiles. Alara sat at the far end on her throne, surrounded by glowing banners of her empire. She looked at Elias gently. "Come forward, Elias Ward," he bowed slightly. "Your Radiance. I asked you here because I wish to thank you," she said. "You've worked with honesty and humility since the day you arrived." "My palace has not run this smoothly in years," the crowd muttered, unimpressed. Alara lifted a small chest beside her. "Inside is a gift, payment for your service and a token of respect." She opened it. Inside shimmered a bar of pure Caloran gold, enough to buy a home and a future. The hall gasped. Elias looked at the glowing gold in disbelief. He shook his head. I can't accept this." The Empress tilted her head. "You can and you will. You've earned it." Elias stepped back slightly. "No, Your Radiance. Please understand. I didn't come here for riches. I just wanted to work honestly, feed my daughter, and live quietly." The nobles began to laugh. Their cold voices echoed off the crystal walls. "Listen to him," one shouted. "The human refuses the Empress's gold." "Ungrateful creature," another sneered. "He spits on her generosity." Elias clenched his jaw, holding Mara close. His voice shook, not with fear, but pride. You think I'm ungrateful because I don't take what I didn't earn. But you're wrong. Respect is not something you can buy. And dignity, that's free. The hall went silent. Even the guards looked uneasy. Lord Kane stepped forward, eyes narrow. You dare speak to the Empress this way? But before he could say more, Alara stood. The gold shimmered behind her as she raised her voice, calm but powerful. He speaks truth, she said. You mock him because he is poor. You mock him because he is human. Yet not one of you has ever refused wealth for honor. Not one of you would spend your last coin for someone else's life. Her words thundered across the hall. The nobles bowed their heads in silence. Alara turned toward Elias and spoke softly. Take the gold not as pity but as proof that a human's worth can never be measured by coin. Elias looked at her for a long moment, then slowly placed his hand over his heart. Then I'll accept it, for my daughter's future, not for myself. The Empress smiled faintly. That is all I hoped for. When Elias left the hall, carrying the chest under one arm and his sleeping baby under the other, the palace was filled with quiet murmurs. Some said the Empress had lost her reason. Others whispered that she had found something far greater. Alara stood by her throne long after he was gone. She stared at the gold chest and whispered to herself, He refuses comfort yet carries peace. He owns nothing yet gives dignity to all who see him. What kind of strength is this? Behind her, Kane's voice broke the silence. The people are restless, Your Radiance. They question your loyalty to your own kind. Alara turned slowly, her golden eyes fierce. Then perhaps it's time they learn what loyalty truly means. That night, while the Empire argued and whispered, the Empress walked alone through the palace garden. The stars shimmered above her, and somewhere far below in a small servant's room, a human father rocked his child to sleep. The galaxy might have seen him as small, but to her, he had become something no one in her world had ever been, a mirror of humanity's quiet greatness. And the first spark of rebellion, not against him, but against the cruelty of her own world, had already begun to burn inside her heart. Kalora's twin moons hung low over the horizon, painting the palace in shades of silver and blue. The city below buzzed with restless whispers. In every shadowed corridor, someone was talking about the same thing, the human father who had captured the Empress's attention. They called him the beggar with honor, the man who refused gold, the earthborn servant who made the queen smile, but not everyone was smiling. In a hidden chamber beneath the council hall, a group of alien nobles gathered around a flickering blue table. Their faces glowed faintly in the dark, eyes sharp and full of anger. Lord Kane stood at the center, his voice cold and steady. She's blinded, he said. The Empress has forgotten who she serves. This human, this Elias Ward, has poisoned her mind with pity. One noble hissed, He's just a worker. Why not send him away? Kane's gaze hardened. Because she would follow him. You saw it. She listens to him more than to us. Every empire falls when its ruler starts caring about the weak. So what do we do? Another whispered. Kane smiled thinly. We remind her where her loyalty lies. Quietly, the human will not live to see another sunrise. While plans of betrayal whispered in the dark, Elias sat on the palace balcony with Mara asleep in his lap. The night breeze was cool, carrying the faint hum of the city below. He didn't know that somewhere far beneath him his name had been spoken like a curse. He looked at the stars, remembering Earth. You see that, Mara? He murmured. That one there used to hang over our farm back home. Your mom said stars don't judge. Maybe that's why I talk to them. The soft sound of approaching footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. He turned and saw the Empress standing in the doorway. Her silver gown shimmered like moonlight. You're still awake, she said gently. Couldn't sleep, he admitted. Too much light in this city. Alara smiled faintly. Humans prefer the dark. You find peace there. Maybe, Elias said. But I think it's because in the dark we see what really matters. The Empress sat beside him, silent for a moment. You've changed the air in this palace, Elias Ward. Even the servants smile now. It used to be so quiet here. Cold, perfect, empty. Elias looked at her, puzzled. You're a ruler. You have everything, Alara's voice softened. Everything except truth. No one tells me the truth. Except you. For a moment they sat in silence, the city lights reflecting in her golden eyes. Somewhere deep inside, Alara felt something dangerous, a warmth she had long forgotten how to name. But their peace didn't last. Later that night, a storm gathered over Calora. Wind howled through the marble towers as Elias woke suddenly to the sound of metal scraping near his door. He froze. Mara stirred in her cradle. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went dark. He reached for the small tool he kept by the bed, a metal spanner, and stepped quietly toward the door. The sound came again, slow, deliberate footsteps. Then whispers in an alien tongue. Elias's pulse quickened. Whoever they weren't guards. The door slid open halfway before he slammed it shut with all his strength, jamming the lock. He whispered, "Stay quiet, baby." Mara whimpered softly. Outside, a voice growled, "Open the door, human. The Empress wants you moved." But Elias had seen the shadows under the crack of the door. Armed figures, not royal guards. He knew a lie when he heard one. He looked around quickly. There was only one way out, the ventilation shaft above the wall. He wrapped Mara in her blanket, climbed onto the desk, and pushed open the grate. As he slid her into the vent, he whispered, "Don't cry, okay? Daddy's right behind you." The door exploded open. Energy blades flashed in the dark. Elias turned, gripping the spanner like a weapon. A tall alien soldier stepped in, sneering. "Orders are orders. You shouldn't have come here, human." Elias didn't hesitate. He swung the tool hard across the alien's arm, sparks flying. The alien roared, dropping his weapon. Another lunged forward, slashing Elias across the shoulder. He stumbled but didn't fall. He shouted toward the vent, "Go, Mara, crawl!" even though she was too small to understand. He grabbed a fallen blaster and fired once. A flash of blue light filled the room, and the invaders scattered. Then, before he could move, a strike hit him across the back. He fell to his knees, blood on his hands. The last thing he saw before everything went black was a pair of armored boots retreating into the hallway, and the faint sound of Mara's cry echoing from the vent. By morning, the palace was chaos. Guards rushed through the corridors, alarms blaring. A servant found Elias half-conscious near the wall, bleeding but alive. When word reached Alara, she stormed into the infirmary, her cloak trailing like a storm cloud. "What happened?" she demanded. A medic bowed. "Assassins, your radiance." He tried to protect the child. He saved her. The Empress's hands trembled. She moved to Elias's bedside. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. But when he opened his eyes, he still managed a faint smile. "I think someone doesn't like your new engineer," he whispered weakly. Alara's throat tightened. "You fool," she said softly, her voice shaking. "Why didn't you call for help?" He smiled faintly. "Didn't have time, I just didn't want her to cry." The Empress turned to her guards, her voice rising with fury.
"Find them."
"All of them. And burn their names from the Empire." That day, for the first time in her reign, Empress Alara wept in front of her people. Not for politics, not for pride, but for a human who had protected what she loved most. Innocence. And as she watched him lie broken on the bed, she whispered the words only he could hear. "You showed me courage. Now I'll show them mercy no more." The skies above Calora burned crimson as the palace bells rang, a sound not heard in 100 years. It meant only one thing, royal wrath. The Empress of 5 worlds, Alara, stood before the high balcony, her silver armor gleaming beneath the rising suns. Below her, the entire capital gathered in silence. For the first time in her reign, she looked not like a distant ruler, but like a storm given form. The council chamber behind her was in ruins. The nobles who had plotted against her were bound and kneeling. Lord Kane, their leader, glared up at her. "You would ruin centuries of order for a single human?" He spat. Alara turned to him slowly. Her golden eyes burned like molten fire. "No," she said softly. "I will ruin centuries of cruelty for the truth he showed me." Kane sneered. "He's nothing. A human beggar who bewitched you with pity." The Empress stepped closer until her shadow fell across him. "He had nothing," she said. "And yet he still gave everything. When your soldiers came for his life, he shielded a child that was not royal. He bled for compassion, something no crown has ever done." Her voice rose through the chamber, echoing against the walls. "You call that weakness? I call it the strength this empire forgot." She gestured to her guards. "Take them away. Strip their titles. Let the empire remember that corruption dies faster than truth." As the traitors were dragged out, Kane's last words were drowned by the roar of the crowd rising from below. In the healing chamber, Elias Ward lay pale but alive. His shoulder was wrapped in glowing bandages, his breath shallow but steady. Beside him, Mara slept peacefully, tiny fingers gripping his shirt. The door opened and the Empress entered, not in her usual royal gown but in a simple robe. She looked exhausted, but there was something in her eyes Elias hadn't seen before. Peace. "You shouldn't be walking around," he murmured, his voice weak but teasing. "I've had worse mornings," she said with a small smile. "You saved your daughter. You saved me too." Elias tried to sit up. "I just did what any parent would do." Elara shook her head. "No, you did what no one in this palace had the courage to do. You faced death for love." He looked away, embarrassed. "I didn't do it for glory." "I know," she said softly. "That's why it matters." For a moment, the two of them sat in silence, listening to Mara's steady breathing. Then Elara placed something small in his hand, a thin metal badge engraved with both human and alien symbols. "What's this?" he asked. "It's the Empress's seal," she said. "It makes you a citizen of all Kelleran worlds, no longer a servant. You are a friend of the crown, and your daughter will grow as one of us." Elias's eyes widened. "Elara, that's too much," she smiled faintly. "So was spending your last coin for a child." Consider it balance. He didn't know what to say. He only nodded and whispered, "Thank you." The Empress looked at him with warmth. "No, Elias, thank you. You reminded a queen how to be human again." The next day, the palace opened its gates for a rare ceremony. The great plaza was filled with aliens from every world, nobles, workers, soldiers, and children. They gathered not for war, not for conquest, but for something their empire had never seen before. A tribute to a human. Elias stood at the center of the marble stage, holding Mara in his arms. His clothes were clean but simple, his eyes humble yet proud. The Empress stepped beside him, her voice echoing across the plaza. "This man," she declared, "taught us that strength does not come from power, but from love. That courage is not born of wealth, but of sacrifice. He came to us with one coin, and gave this empire a soul." The crowd fell silent, many lowering their heads in shame, others clapping with tears in their eyes. Even the palace guards, creatures bred for war, struck their chests in salute. Elara turned toward Elias. "Elias, Ward of Earth, from this day forward, you and your daughter are under my protection. The Empire will remember your name, not as a servant, but as a symbol." Elias bowed slightly. "I'm no hero, Your Radiance. I just did what any father would do." The Empress smiled gently. "And that is why you are one." As the ceremony ended, the suns dipped behind the towers and light scattered across the city like shards of gold. Elara watched Elias lift Mara into the air, the little girl laughing under the crimson sky. For a moment, all of Kelora seemed to breathe again. She whispered to herself, "One coin bought diapers, but it also bought hope." When Elias turned, their eyes met, human and alien, different worlds bound by something simple and pure. Not power, not wealth, but understanding. And as the stars rose above them, the galaxy would remember this story of a poor human father, an alien empress, and how, for the first time in history, love was stronger than the empire.